Viewing or listening to this podcast confirms acceptance of the disclaimer visible on your screen or found at authorscott.com/podcast. Welcome to the Regaining Health and Humanity podcast. I'm Dr. Scott Johnson, your guide on this journey to natural well-being. Here we explore evidence-based insights, revolutionary breakthroughs, and powerful health strategies that not only inform, but inspire change. Together, we'll uncover the mysteries of human existence and unlock the secrets to thriving. This podcast is more than just knowledge. It's your catalyst for unleashing extraordinary potential. Get ready. Your journey to boundless health and happiness starts now. Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Regaining Health and Humanity podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Johnson, and I'm truly grateful you're joining us today. In mid-April of this year, new data revealed that autism prevalence in the United States has risen to 131 children. As this epidemic continues to grow, teams of leading scientists are working hard to uncover its root causes. Meanwhile, parents of children with autism and individuals living with autism themselves are searching for ways to find real improvement, often with minimal support from the traditional medical community. That's why I've invited Amanda Crowell to join us today. Amanda is a registered nurse with a background in critical care and neurotrauma ICU. After her oldest child experienced regression and was later diagnosed with autism and apraxia, Amanda shifted her focus toward uncovering the root cause of complex pediatric conditions. Now a full-time mom of 3, she is a passionate advocate for children with special needs and is committed to raising awareness and supporting fellow parents navigating the medical complexities often seen in autism. Amanda is currently training through the Medical Academy of Pediatric Special Needs, MAPS is the acronym for that, and has been accepted into University of Michigan's Doctor of Nursing Practice program, Family Nurse Practitioner track starting this fall, allowing her to continue to pursue her dream of opening an integrative practice for medically complex children. She shares research-based insights and holistic resources on her Instagram platform, helping families feel less alone and more empowered in their healing journey. Welcome, Amanda.
Hi, thank you so much for having me and for reaching out. It's truly an honor to be here and to be able to speak about this topic because it's so near and dear to my heart. And in the beginning of my journey, all I wanted was someone to tell me everything that I know now and to find my community because I was so alone, because nobody in my immediate world or family or friends was going through what I was going through. But, somewhere out there, there was hundreds and hundreds of parents going through what I was feeling and wanting the same answers and not getting them. And so now I've just kind of over the years found my community and found all of this information. And I just feel like I have to give back everything that I've learned and to just spread awareness to reach those families that are where I was years ago in a really dark place.
Things are going to drive you to become expert in a health condition besides having your own diagnosis of something or a child or close loved one that is experiencing something, and you really want to just dive into it and figure it out. And in the beginning, you start to feel alone, like you just don't have any support system. Nobody understands you. So I appreciate that you're spreading awareness about this issue because I am confident that there are a lot of other moms and dads that are out there in that same situation right now, just looking for anything that can give them hope.
Absolutely.
Amanda, I mentioned earlier a little bit about what inspired you to become both a holistic nurse and an advocate for individuals with autism. Can you expand on this and share how it has shaped your approach to care?
Yeah. So prior to having a son regress into autism, so the first year of his life, we didn't have any concerns. He was actually really advanced in a lot of things. And so it really took us by surprise when he got really ill around 12 months and he just started to go downhill and started to lose skills that he had previously acquired. And there was no sense of urgency by the medical community. It was kind of one of those like, we'll just keep watching him. he's still so young. I was even told like, well, he's said those words before, like maybe he's not choosing to say them now. Like I've heard just about everything. And in my gut, things never felt right. But what I was taught when I went to school about autism wasn't what I was witnessing, because we had a child that was previously fully engaged. The eye contact was there. I mean, he was so affectionate. He was so in tune with everything. He communicated okay. Everything was there. And then it's just like we started to lose it. And so for me, when I went to Google, like most people do, they go to Google, and I was starting to Google autism to find out more about it. Cause as a nurse, I really didn't even know like the nitty gritties about autism. I just knew what we were taught, which was very surface level. You can have a child that has severe regressive autism, like my son, and then you can have another one who's very high functioning, and you might not know it unless they tell you they have that label. So that label of autism, unfortunately, doesn't give us a really good idea of what's going on with that individual and how to support that individual, because those needs are going to be really different. And so Google wasn't the most informative thing. I kind of found it just reiterated what I was told by mainstream. I wasn't really getting anywhere. And of all places, I think this is when I maybe started using Instagram. I came across an autism dietitian, a dietitian who I think she had a family member or something. So it drove her to look into what she could do to help the loved one with autism. She was advocating for dietary changes and gluten and dairy free specifically. And I remember just thinking like, that's just kind of bizarre. But
Right.
here I am, literally just like asking for help, searching for answers, and we're getting nothing from our doctors other than he's showing signs of autism, and we knew that. And so we were told that we had to get on a wait list for an evaluation. And as many families probably know, those wait lists can be sometimes up to a year, which is really sad, because then you're just waiting, you're not doing anything, and a child's continuing to fall further and further behind. And so we were told to get put on a wait list for a diagnosis. And in the meantime, we weren't doing anything. And I should say, I didn't come across this information about the autism dietitian until we had actually gotten our autism diagnosis. So I was just kind of searching the internet and finding all the same information, nothing that was really resonating with me other than, okay, we need to get this kid into therapy, and we can't do that until we check all these boxes. And so he got diagnosed. I found this autism dietitian, and I told my husband, okay, he's always had reflux. Dairy just stood out to me. I said, let's eliminate dairy first. My husband told me I was crazy because all our son ate was pretty much cheese and yogurt and drank milk all the time. Like most kids do, they love these items, and the gluten, like mac and cheese. Sure, I fed him vegetables and fruit, but it was like those were the foods he gravitated towards. So I told my husband we were going to do dairy first, and we tried eliminating dairy first. And we kind of failed initially because these kids can actually have withdrawals when you start to remove these foods. But then I looked into further why gluten and dairy free, and that just motivated me. And so I came up with a plan. We committed, and about 2.5 weeks in, we saw a different kid. Like we saw the eye contact start to come back. We saw skills start to come back. We saw him point for the first time to something in the distance. He tried to say truck and pointed out the window. And so that for me changed everything. And it just opened up this whole world of healing that I knew nothing about. And I was like, there's something to this, and I'm going to keep digging to see what else I can find to help support my son. And so then I started to see things through a root cause lens versus just a symptom management, which is kind of what I had always known as a nurse. So yeah, just kind of changed my view on things.
It's really amazing the differences that you can see in a child who's experiencing something like this just from making dietary changes, because so many
Yes.
people would not think of that first. They just think, oh, there's a medication out there that I need, but really we are what we eat.
Mm-hmm.
And in the typical American diet is largely highly processed dead foods that just don't have the nutrition our body
Yeah.
needs. When we eliminate those and put more fresh and whole foods in, then we start to see some massive differences in our overall function.
Absolutely. And it's like we don't think twice about putting the proper fuel into a vehicle. Like we
Hmm.
know if you put the wrong kind, it's not going to run as efficiently. And yet with
Yeah,
our bodies, we just, that doesn't matter.
right. You talk often about underlying medical conditions in autism. What are some of the most common imbalances or conditions you see that are frequently missed or just
Mm.
dismissed?
There are many, and a lot of them kind of feed into each other. So if you have one, it's usually because there's other ones. But the big ones with kids with autism that come to mind are gut infections. Most of these children experience some type of gut dysfunction or gut infections. And gut-brain connection is so huge. So also, if your gut's a mess, you're not absorbing nutrients well, and they can end up having nutrient deficiencies. They can end up having food sensitivities because that leaky gut is letting food in. The immune system's acting on it inappropriately. Cerebral folate deficiency is a huge one that I think is kind of getting some headway finally. That's treatable. Let's see what else. PANS PANDAS is a big one because a lot of the symptoms
Right.
overlap with autism. And it's like that, extreme behaviors, the OCD. You can have severe onset of like sleep issues, food restrictions, and that is being driven by infectious processes and immune dysfunction. And
hmm
so a lot of times these kids are just given an autism diagnosis and nobody's looking at they could have an infection that's triggering a brain autoimmunity. So it's an attack on the basal ganglia. And then sleep issues. Like so many children with autism or people, these children often aren't sleeping well. And so there's ways that we can support the body. We need to figure out, are they not sleeping good because their bodies are so overloaded with glutamate, which is the excitatory neurotransmitter. And there needs to be a balance between GABA and glutamate. So most of these kids are eating a lot of processed foods, which are extremely high in glutamate. Gluten and dairy are extremely high in glutamate. So when we went gluten and dairy free, I wonder, is it what the reduction in the glutamate? Was it the food sensitivities? Was it the cerebral folate? Like there's so many reasons gluten and dairy free can benefit a child. Mitochondrial dysfunction is another big
hmm
one. And that kind of layers into all of these other things too. But if your mitochondria, like the energy powerhouses of the cell, aren't getting enough energy, you're going to see those areas that are the most energy demanding affected first. And so, our brain requires a ton of oxygen. So in these children that aren't producing energy efficiently anymore, you can see regression. You can see issues with speech, with like the fine motor, because those are more taxing on our mitochondria. So those are some of the things that come to mind.
You've mentioned the word regression. Can you speak to regression and how it's not normal and often points to an underlying medical issue?
Yes. So regression, that's kind of the main thing I want to get across is regression is not normal. But unfortunately, we see it a lot in autism. And so many parents just accept it. And they're like, oh, yeah, my child regressed. They had these skills and they have autism now. And they don't really look for answers why. And that's what bothers me the most is because there's a reason that child regressed. And we need to figure out why so that we can support their body and address it because oftentimes these are treatable things like cerebral folate deficiency, mitochondrial dysfunction, infections, the gut being a mess. All these things can lead to regression in a child. And then also on the regression thing, I want to talk about a genetic disorder because there are some children who do have a true genetic component, and my son's actually one of them. And one day I'll have to share his full story because it's pretty wild. We didn't know about his genetic disorder until he was maybe 5.5 or 6. And at 3, he was considered like a typical peer. And so
Mm.
with the interventions that we did, he was appearing like a normal neurotypical child. And we would have never have guessed there was a genetic component. So basically, I just want to mention that even when you can tie it back to a genetic component, a true genetic component, not just a variation or genetic susceptibility, and when you have genetic testing done and you have a genetic disorder, those kids actually need even more support. Oftentimes people are like, it's genetic, you can't do anything about it. And it's like, no, we saw our son with the right supports and addressing the right things. We saw his body function at a level that people told us that he never had autism, that we were making it up. So I just wanted to mention that even those children that do have a genetic component, don't forget about them. Support them even more. They need your help even more.
You've mentioned a couple of times dairy and gluten.
Hmm.
Can you go into a little bit more specifically on why you recommend eliminating dairy and gluten for individuals who are on the spectrum, and what kind of improvements have you seen when families make this type of switch?
For me, I didn't know all the reasons why I was making the switch at first, but I knew that tons of parents were reporting positive changes. So for someone in my shoes, I'm going to take that. That holds value for me. And so we personally witnessed it. And then also, even in addition to autism specifically, if you look up the benefits of removing gluten and dairy, you can see hundreds of studies that show the improvements and the benefits of autoimmune disorders and inflammatory conditions. So there's tons of literature backing this up. This isn't just something people are recommending for no good reason. For the gluten, there's a few reasons specifically. So most of our grains and foods are fortified with folic acid. And most of us know that folic acid is a big issue. And then also, if you have folate receptor autoantibodies, which is one of the contributing factors to cerebral folate deficiency, folic acid further worsens cerebral folate deficiency. And then zonulin. So anytime you eat gluten, whether you're healthy or someone who has an impaired health or leaky gut, zonulin, it's going to cause some degree of leaky gut, unfortunately. And so when the gut opens up, those food proteins go into the bloodstream and the immune system reacts, and then you can start to develop these immune issues and food sensitivities. And also the glutamate thing, which I kind of already touched on. So those are some of the main things. Oh, and also for dairy. Dairy is just very inflammatory for a lot of kids. And there are a lot of ENTs and people who recommend the children who have like the chronic ear infections and that sort of thing to pull dairy because it's very mucus producing. And also dairy is a trigger for the folate receptor autoantibodies. It's an autoimmune attack essentially on the folate receptors, which is causing cerebral folate deficiency in a large majority of kids. Like 71% of kids with autism that they're testing are showing positive folate receptor autoantibodies, meaning that there's an autoimmune process going on that's not allowing adequate folate to get to the brain. And mammal's milk is a trigger for those antibodies. So anytime you're drinking any milk, camel's milk is kind of a thing in the autism world. There's immune benefits. There's lots of benefits to camel's milk, but unfortunately, camel's milk is the worst if you have cerebral folate deficiency caused by folate receptor autoantibodies. Another thing someone brought to my attention, which I thought was really interesting, was they are finding that the antibodies are being triggered when cow's milk is being introduced. So a lot of times if these children are breastfed, as soon as they get switched over to dairy and they're drinking cow's milk, they will start to have the production of these if they're testing positive.
It's interesting because, our current milk supply is homogenized, it's pasteurized, it's a very dead inflammatory food. And there is the challenge also of the more concentrated a milk product is, the more casomorphins are going to be present in it. And
Thank you. Yes,
casomorphins
that's a
are
huge one. Thank you for bringing that up. I overlooked that.
yeah, they're these chemicals that are in cow's milk that are
Yes.
highly addictive and
It
interact with
is.
similar receptors in our brain that a drug morphine does. And
Yes.
so when you get to a highly processed dairy product like cheese, it's going to be highly concentrated in these
Mm.
casomorphins. And I've personally seen children actually relieve their constipation just by switching off of
Yes.
the dairy products
Yes,
because of
we
all of
noticed
these things.
improvements with that as well. Reflux and then the constipation got better.
Mhm. That kind of is a great segue, I think, because you've mentioned the folic acid and
Mhm.
folate. Folic acid is added to our
Mm.
foods like bread and cereals because the government requirements
Everywhere.
to quote unquote fortify our foods. But why are you cautious about folic acid specifically, and what alternatives do you prefer? I'm particularly interested in what you've mentioned about cerebral folate deficiency and how addressing this can be one of the most impactful options currently available.
I think the problem with folic acid is that not everybody can use the synthetic form of folate appropriately. So if you're one of those people who has no MTHFR variations, then that's fine, but that's a
Hmm.
small percentage of the population. And I think they initially introduced folic acid in attempts to reduce the neural tube defects.
Right.
And they did see a little improvement in that. And so they just figured it was acceptable for everybody. But really, if it was benefiting everybody, they would have seen even more improvement in midline defects, which we're seeing a ton of midline defects today with like tongue ties and other things. So if you're somebody who has an MTHFR variant, this is just a variation in one of your MTHFR genes, you're not going to be able to take that synthetic folate and convert it and use it properly. So instead, what your options are, just natural folate that's occurring in foods is, of course, great. And then there's folinic acid, which unfortunately sounds a lot like folic acid, and sometimes people get them confused, but it's not the same thing. It is further converted and often bypasses those issues that people would have with folic acid. So folinic acid is acceptable. And then there is just methylfolate, which is what the body essentially is trying to get to anyways. It's trying to turn the folate into methylfolate. So that can be called like 5-MTHF. There's actually a guy named Ron who started a folate choice group on Facebook. And so his goal is to get the attention of people to try to remove folic acid from our food. We know we need to have an alternative. They're going to want an alternative. So folinic acid is something that everybody can utilize. If anyone feels passionate about this and wants to check out that group and help support this cause, I just wanted to mention that. And also, as far as cerebral folate deficiency, we already mentioned that folic acid was an issue for that. And the reason being is folic acid has a very high affinity for folate receptors. But if you can't use that folic acid properly, it's basically going to gunk up the folate receptor. And then like the actual folate your body can use, it can't get in. And in cerebral folate deficiency, there's actually also the folate receptor autoantibodies that are also gunking up these receptors. And so basically you need forms of folate that can bypass that if this is an issue in a child so that you can restore folate to the brain. And this is a really time-sensitive issue, which is why I'm so passionate about it. We have a personal story with cerebral folate deficiency. When I first read about it, I was like, my child is like the poster boy for cerebral folate deficiency. I was like, we need to get him tested and we need to start treating this immediately. And so to do the test, currently the only one I'm aware of is for the folate receptor autoantibodies is you can go to fratnow.com and get this test done. And then the treatment, if they have these folate receptor autoantibodies, is high dose folinic acid or leucovorin, which is prescription. It's an off-label use. And Dr. Fry and Dr. Rosengal are involved in a lot of the research with this. I've listened to like a lot of their talks, and Dr. Fry just wrote a book about the folate fix. But they're showing the sooner that this intervention is introduced and treated aggressively, like a lot of times we can reverse these issues. And this is present in children that don't have autism as well. Mm-hmm. So other children that have speech delay or that show a regression or that have cognitive issues or motor issues, seizures is a big one. Being deprived of folate in the brain can lead to all of these things. And so I really just want to spread awareness because we need to be screening all these children. The folate receptor autoantibodies is only one cause of cerebral folate deficiency. Mitochondrial dysfunction is another contributing factor. There's just not enough energy to push the folate through to get to where it needs to go. So there can be lots of different reasons.
Yeah, those are all important points. And I've seen some of the research that you're talking about. To me, it's remarkable. It's fascinating. It's surprising to me that it's not as well known in the medical community and that there are very few physicians or healthcare professionals or providers that even know that that is a possibility and that that's something that they should be testing for and trying to reverse if it is an issue early on in the child's development process.
Yeah. So actually, our son he did the FRAT test and he was high for blocking and binding antibodies. And when we first started supplementing with proper folate and high doses, day 2, we actually saw him. So what I would do is I would work with him with like puzzles that he used to be able to do and like these peg boards that had like 2 pegs, 3 pegs, 4, and like putting the proper things on. Day 2, he couldn't do any of those things. It was just, hand over hand. He just acted like he didn't know what was going on. Day 2 of high dose folate, he sat down at his little picnic table. He completed all of his puzzles. He did all his pegboards in like record speed and stood up and clapped for himself. And that same day, he walked up the stairs for the first time ever in his life. We had always like held his hands because by this time he was 2.5 or a little older, and he had never walked up the stairs by himself. It was too much coordination. He struggled so bad with coordination that he couldn't do it. And he walked up the stairs by himself for the first time on the second day of treating this. So it just goes to show how if you're deprived of folate in the brain, like you need to address it promptly.
I hope that we can get folic acid removed from our foods, like you mentioned. There's not a need for that to be in our foods. And it's one of the reasons people will always tell me, I can go to Europe and I can eat all the bread that I want. And I don't have these issues. But when I'm in America, I eat the bread again and I have these issues. So that's one of the reasons, because of the folic acid that's just loaded into our grains here in the United States. One of the other things I've seen you mentioning quite frequently on your Instagram page is you emphasize the importance of a clean home environment. What are some of the most toxic products people may not realize they're using daily, and what are safer alternatives?
Yeah, I think everything we're using is toxic and we just don't realize it because it's normal, right? It's normal. But cleaners around the house are a big one. Most people are still using cleaners that are chemical based, that have toxins and fragrance, and natural alternatives are just as effective. There's a lot of DIY recipes and you can Google those. There's also a lot of really good brands out there. And on my page, if you go to my profile, you can see some of the ones that I advocate for, that I personally have used over the years. And then when it comes to disinfecting, I know everyone freaks out about this because they're like, we need to be able to disinfect when someone's puking or, they have stomach flu, or I understand that concern. And hypochlorous acid is my favorite thing for that. It is actually EPA approved. It can be used in hospitals. It can be used in commercial settings for disinfecting. It's 100% safe. You can even spray it on your wounds. And so it's like, why are we using these toxic disinfectants in nurseries, in schools that we know have neurotoxins in them and all these chemicals that cause cancer? Why are we using these around our kids? And you see people using the wipes without gloves on too, and it just makes me cringe. But when there's an alternative that is just as effective and that is completely human safe. So I really hope people start looking for better options because they are out there. And then the personal hygiene products. So everything you are putting on your body, our skin is our biggest organ and we do absorb. So whether that's, water coming out of your shower. So if you have city water, you need to be filtering out like the chlorine and the fluoride and all the contaminants. And then toothpaste. A lot of people think that they need fluoride in their toothpaste for their teeth and for cavities. But last I checked, our teeth don't need fluoride.
Yep.
So you can actually find toothpaste that is fluoride free. It has minerals, it has hydroxyapatite, it has things in it that will help restore that enamel. And so I think people are finally catching on to the fluoride thing, that it is a known neurotoxin. So we should definitely be avoiding that in our children that have neurological issues.
Right. The Japanese were ahead of the game when it came to that toothpaste. They were the ones who really started to use hydroxyapatite in their toothpaste more frequently. And I'm glad that that trend is now being adopted in the United States and more of those toothpastes are available. That's the mineral that your teeth need. It doesn't need the fluoride.
And I want to ask you something about that. So I haven't done a deep dive, but I heard that some people caution against nano hydroxyapatite, and they say just to go with the hydroxyapatite. So I do it just to be safe, but I was wondering if you knew specifics or anything more on that.
Yeah, that's an interesting debate. I think we in society just have a negative connotation around the word nano, period. But nano doesn't really mean bad. It's just the size of a particle. And the interesting thing about that is when you really look into the research, and it's complex, the answer is really complex, but just to simplify it, the way that our body metabolizes and utilizes hydroxyapatite, even the nanohydroxyapatite, is safe. It will be absorbed into the teeth, but it's not going to really go systemic because of the way that our body uses the toothpaste and the ingredients that are within that toothpaste. And so I personally don't have a problem with the nano form. Some of the research shows that the nano form is a little bit more effective in remineralizing the teeth than the micro form is. And so it might be a little bit more effective that way. But if you want to use the non-nano form, you can use that if you still have concerns.
Okay. Yeah. And then another thing that just came to mind is clothing. And this is probably nothing people were thinking about. But even when I was a child, which wasn't that terribly long ago, everything was made out of cotton or wool. And
Yep.
even, you had more linen. And now we just see clothes made out of plastic, basically. All of
Mm-hmm.
our children's clothes are made out of these toxic fabrics. And that really bothers me too. I was looking for socks for my children the other day and I couldn't find cotton socks anywhere. So I just think, that's another thing we need to be mindful of is the clothes that we're wearing too. And there's frequencies that different fabrics give off. And there's a reason linen is the most expensive because it has the highest frequency and that does help your body with healing. Cotton is neutral, so and it's the most affordable. So I typically try to look for cotton clothing for my kids too.
I think that's really important as well. You mentioned filtered water briefly. I personally have a whole house filter. So the water, as soon as it comes into the home, is all filtered. So it's in my sinks, it's in my bathtubs, it's in my showers. And so
Perfect.
that's protecting me against the chlorine and the other chemicals that are found in typical water. But can you
So you have
explain how
sorry.
filtered water, daily bowel movements, and targeted nutrient support play a role in detoxification and also neurological health?
Yes. So our bodies need to detox regularly. You exhale, you sweat, you pee, you poop. All of these are ways that our body is getting rid of toxins. So being hydrated on a cellular level is really important. So we don't want to add more toxic burden to us while we're hydrating. So it is important to do that first step of filtering. And so I think that's important is knowing what's in your water if you have well water, because a lot of times it can be okay. But city water, you absolutely want to be filtering that. So you're lowering your toxic load. Then pooping is a big one. And that seems to be a big issue with children with autism because they're either pooping too much or they're not pooping enough. And so most of them aren't pooping enough. They're constipated, or I find even parents will say that their kid, they go every day, but then they have all symptoms of being constipated. And when they have a KUB, they do an x-ray of their abdomen. They're completely compacted with stool. And the issue with that is if you're not getting rid of all of those toxins every day, you're recirculating them. And so that another thing that kind of gets me is when I see all of these detox trends and products on the internet, which yes, I do think there's benefit to a lot of them, but if they are introduced when somebody's detox pathways are shut down
Right.
and their body's not detoxing and you're going to try to push something that further detoxes, you're really just going to be recirculating toxins. So the first step I tell everybody, like before you try anything fancy, you really need to just go to the basics. Like make sure you're eating, drinking, and you know what I mean? You're avoiding exposures. That's number one.
You also advocate for a strong foundation of whole foods and nutrient dense eating. What nutrients are especially critical for individuals with autism, and how can families fill those gaps?
Yeah, so whole foods eating. I know it's really hard because most of our children are addicted to their preferred food items. So it can be really overwhelming. And for me now, looking back, I don't know how we got here because just like everyone else struggling in the beginning, my son had his preferred foods and we have come a long way since then. But I think people need to realize like this doesn't have to happen overnight. And if they think that they have to go from where they're at now I have to have a whole foods diet for my child or I'm going to fail, then
Mhm.
they get overwhelmed and they don't want to do anything. So they really need to just make like one small change at a time, one step at a time, and have a plan. That's the most important thing. So nutrients, a lot of these children are deficient in everything across the board, but the big ones that stand out are the B vitamins. Zinc is a huge one for autism. And if you're deficient in zinc, that can even make picky eating worse, and it can lead to pica. These mineral deficiencies, a lot of these children are mouthing everything and eating things that aren't food. And so that's their body like trying to they communicate like they need minerals.
Mm-hmm.
Omega-3s are often deficient. The fats in general, we're, as a society, a lot of us fear fats. And these kids, their brains are made up of fat, and they need a lot of good, healthy fats. And so that's really important. And then antioxidants, because a lot of these children, they don't produce glutathione effectively. So if you compare like a child with autism versus a neurotypical child, they don't have as much glutathione, which is like the body's master antioxidant, which helps to scavenge all these free radicals and keep oxidative stress down. So antioxidants are really huge. And if you're not eating produce, then, where are you getting antioxidants from? So in circumstances when people are just starting out, and the diet is a really big issue, and they're having a lot of restrictions, and your child has to eat. We can't just let our kids starve and say, oh, eventually they'll eat. I don't think that's a good approach. But sometimes in the beginning, supplements can be really beneficial. I'm a fan of supplements personally. I've noticed the benefits for myself and my son. I don't think the gap that he had where he was at, he could have caught up as quickly if he wasn't supplementing. So that can be really beneficial. And really offering children a wide variety of foods. Because a lot of people will say, like, my kid won't eat that vegetable, but have you tried it frozen? Have you tried it roasted? Have you tried it raw? You know what I mean? There's a lot of different ways to serve a food. And sometimes, like, I found my kids really like frozen vegetables. So it's just one of those things. They have sensory issues, and switching things up just because they didn't like a food last year doesn't mean they won't like it this year. So just kind of reintroducing things.
It's interesting you mentioned frozen foods because I know my kids like to have frozen grapes. So that's one thing that we do.
Sometimes you just need to meet them where they're at and go with what their likes and dislikes are.
Sleep, movement, and sunlight might sound simple, but why are they essential pillars in improving outcomes for autism and overall well-being?
So sleep. Yes, most children with autism struggle with sleep, unfortunately, and sleep is so important. We know everyone tells us we need to get our sleep. And another thing I don't think people realize is the brain has its own detox system. It's called the lymphatic system. And the hours that the brain is most effective at getting rid of all the waste in our brain is from, I believe it's 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. So if you have a child that's staying up until 1 a.m. every night, and they already are, having symptoms of autism or all these issues, their body's not properly detoxing. That's just going to further exacerbate things. So we need to figure out why this child's not sleeping and support them so that they can get that restorative healing sleep. And then also the movement thing. So the lymphatic system, it doesn't have its own pump.
Right.
So we need to move. We need to move to keep all those toxins flushing out. And one of the most fun ways for children to do this is a trampoline. And I don't think people realize how good trampolines are for children, especially children with autism. Get your kids jumping. And then the sunlight thing. Sunlight regulates so many things with our immune system, with our hormones and our health. And we need the sunlight to make vitamin D. And also, if we don't have adequate magnesium, that conversion might not be effective. But how many of our kids are indoors all day long and they're not getting sunlight? And then on top of that, they have screens in their face. And so they're getting blue lights. So just little tips I've found throughout the years is you can get screen protectors for things that block the blue lights. Also, in my kids' bedrooms, we use red light night lights, which I think is pretty cool. And when you're able to, just getting outdoors in the morning and the evening, they consider that like the red light, you're getting the benefits of red light from the sun in the morning and the evening. That can really help regulate a child's circadian rhythm and help with sleep.
It's funny that you mentioned the screen protectors because as we're having this interview, I have protectors, blue light filter protectors on both of the monitors that I'm facing right now. And so that's just something that I've had for years because I've seen the research showing the damaging effects of blue light exposure and constant exposure to it. Amanda, it's been a really enlightening conversation. One last question I want to end on is I think a lot of parents and caregivers will probably feel overwhelmed that I've got to do all of these different things to help them. And you've kind of mentioned it's a baby step process. So if they they were to prioritize the top 3 actions that they can take today to begin supporting their child's health holistically and sustainably, what would you tell a parent to do?
I would start with the basic stuff. Don't get into all the fancy things. Stick with the foundations. We can't really cheat our way to good health. We know we need to focus on diet, nutrition, just all of the basics, clean water, reducing our exposures to toxins, just really sticking with the basics. You need to master these things, and it needs to be a lifestyle. So that's number one. And then, like you just reiterated and touched on again, just taking it in baby steps. Don't get overwhelmed. Like, this does not have to be done overnight. Break it down. However, some people can take on more than others at once. So come up with a plan and just pick one thing and continue with that momentum. And as that you make that adjustment, add one more thing in. So you're not overwhelming yourself, because really the goal is progress, not perfection. And then my next one would be a lot of times you need professional help to help guide you. This is too much to take on. I know there are parents that have been able to even recover their children from symptoms of autism on their own with like dietary changes and doing things from home. But unfortunately, most of our kids are so sick today, and there are so many underlying medical issues going on that the basic foundations, although we need those in place, oftentimes those are not going to be enough to help our kids fully get to their potential. So I recommend looking for a provider who's MAPS trained. That way you know that they are going to be aware of these underlying medical issues, versus if you just went to someone who didn't have this training, I can't guarantee that they're going to be aware of all these things that they should be looking into. Some names of places that come off the top of my head: Amen clinics. They are an integrative functional medicine practice located in several locations, and same with Cortica centers. And that's also like an integrative, holistic approach to autism.
Thank you. I second getting the right professionals that are supportive of you taking a more holistic approach is really important, because some of the things that I can think of that a holistic professional could help you with is we have the ability now that we can do the genetic testing. So first and foremost, we're going to see what kind of genetics are involved or are not involved in the child and the autism that they're experiencing. But we can also do nutrigenomics analysis. You can actually test the child and see what foods they're going to best process based on the genetic profile they have. That will also tell you the best type of exercise that they can participate in that's for their body specifically. We can do these tests to see what kind of nutrient deficiencies or insufficiencies are in the child, and what we need to work on first. And so there's all of these different things that you need to work with your professional to get a better picture and idea of what's going on with your child. And it will help guide you to help them more effectively if you're doing that. So I think that's important, what you're pointing out there. And I really appreciate everything you've shared. It's been an enlightening conversation, and I hope that it's given hope to the listeners who are grandparents, who are parents, who have a child or a grandchild that has autism, that you can actually make improvements and you can support that child with these steps that you're mentioning. Thank you so much for being on today and sharing these tips and suggestions.
Thank you so much for having me. It means so much that you wanted to interview me and just spread awareness on this topic, because I know so many families are searching for answers right now. So if anybody wants to reach out, I'm always happy to guide anybody to resources. I know it can be really overwhelming in the beginnings. You can find me at my.holistic.haven on Instagram. And yeah, I just want to thank you again. And I'm going to get your new book that's coming out, and I'm going to read that. So I'm really excited. I feel like I have a lot to learn from you as well, because essential oils and what you specialize in isn't anything that I have ever really dove into deeply. So I'm interested in adding that to my toolbox as well.
I definitely say give them a try. I know I've been involved in some cases with mothers excitedly sharing with me how their child went from nonverbal to verbal because of certain essential oils that they've used in their journey. So I think that they are just another tool in our toolkit that we can use along with everything else that we're doing.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing your time with us today. I hope you've gained insights to elevate your health and life. For more transformative evidence-based wisdom, I invite you to explore my 20-plus books at authorscott.com/shop. Don't miss out on the chance to supercharge your health and guide others to a better life. Like, share, and subscribe to join the movement transforming lives. Here's to your journey toward boundless health and happiness.